And we're on.
Hello, everyone. My name is Szymon Ananicz. I'm from the Stefan Batory Foundation. I warmly welcome you at the joint event of the ECFR Warsaw and the Stefan Batory Foundation. The main theme today is a very serious one. It's should the EU fear the Polexit? The objective of this debate, of this discussion, is to assess the current stage of the political and legal confrontation between Poland and the European Union. This stage was opened last Thursday with the ruling of the Constitutional Tribunal in Poland, which challenged the principle of the primacy of EU law. It declared parts of the EU treaty incompatible with Polish constitution and refused to accept the judgments of the Court of Justice of the European Union, in particular with respect to the principle of independence of the judiciary. And we have a wonderful lineup of experts with us to help us make sense of this new situation, of this hardening crisis. I would like to warmly welcome all of them and thank you very much for turning up on such a short notice in an emergency mode. I would like to welcome Caroline Gruyter, who is a journalist and a lecturer based in Brussels. She's a European Affairs correspondent and columnist for the leading Dutch newspapers NRC Handelsblad, and a regular contributor to Foreign Policy, Observer, and The Standard. And she spent more than 20 years covering Europe, different corners of the continent. So this means that she has a unique perspective on this crisis between Poland and the European Union. Also, hello to Milan Nicz, who is a senior fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations in Berlin, in particular in Alfred von Oppenheim Center for European Policy. And he's a formidable expert on the Visegrad group and on also many other topics. He used to be also the head of the Europe program at the Globsec Policy Institute in Bratislava. And he's also a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. I welcome Shahin Vallée, who is the head of the GAP's, that is German Council on Foreign Relations Geoeconomics program. Before joining the GAP, he was a senior economist at the Soros Fund Management. And he also served as a personal advisor to George Soros. And before that, he was also an economic advisor to Emmanuel Macron when he was minister at the Ministry of Economy and Finance. Last but not least, I warmly welcome my dear colleague Piotr Buras, the head of ECFR Warsaw office. He's a senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Specializes in many things in Germany's EU policy and foreign policy, Poland's foreign policy, but he's been also particularly active in covering this rule of law crisis in Poland and has written extensively very good analysis, and I recommend everyone to follow his publication, as well as everybody else's from this group. This discussion is streamed via the Stefan Batory Foundation's channel on Facebook and in Polish. It's been translated into Polish. It's also streamed via the Facebook channel of the ECFR Warsaw. It's in English. also on YouTube of the Stefan Batory Foundation, also in English. But we also benefit from the help of several media outlets in Poland who are very interested in this topic, and therefore also the viewers of Polityka can watch it live. Euroactive PL, Oko Press, and Video Code, the Committee of Defense of Democracy in Poland. If there is time for questions from the viewers at this panel, I hope there will be at least a little time. Then to the viewers, I would like to ask you to put those questions on the Facebook page of the Stefan Batory Foundation. That's where we collect it. And if there is time, I will pass them on to the speakers in the end. Just one final notice before we start. Caroline de Gruyter will have to leave a little bit earlier, towards the end of the meeting, but there will be plenty of time to ask her questions beforehand. So, without further ado, I would like to start the discussion. I'd like to start with asking my colleagues about their general assessment of where we are now as regards the rule of law crisis in Poland and in the European Union. Maybe I would start off with posing this question to Caroline. You've covered European affairs for 20 years, so I'm sure you've witnessed so many crises in the European Union. And does this one stand out as an existential threat, as it is sometimes portrayed by commentators and analysts, or I don't know, emotional politicians? Is the situation serious from your point of view? And what is your general assessment of where we are?
Thank you, Szymon. Yeah, I think it is pretty serious. Can you hear me well?
We can hear you very well.
Okay, good. I think it is pretty serious. I mean, as all the crises were serious, by the way, but we tackle them one at a time. I mean, it's serious because it undermines the whole rule of law in the European Union. And this is why everybody, or almost, is so upset and worried about it. Because the rule of law is the basis of European integration. When countries decided to set up the single market, they needed rules for that market. And they also needed an arbiter to judge in case of conflicts. And the verdicts of that arbiter are binding for everybody, for all member states. And this started with rules on state aid, non-discrimination of companies from another member state, definitions of products. And then came, workers' rights, consumer protection, social rights, some of them, data protection, the whole lot. But this all can only work if all the member states recognize the primacy of EU law. There's no way around it. If one state starts rejecting this primacy on one ground, the other will do it on another ground. And in no time, disrespect for the European Court of Justice will mushroom. Look at the UK where it started. Look also at France now, where one of the political parties is picking at the primacy of European law on migration. Once this starts, it unravels the whole thing, and you cannot control it really. So I think this is rather dangerous for all of us. Already the European arrest warrant is not working properly because when you send somebody back to Poland, is somebody like that safe? We cannot be sure anymore. So Yeah, but concerning your question, what we can do, well, put pressure. We cannot send in the army. There is no European army, and I'm not sure if we had one, anybody would want to send it in. So we have a limited amount of avenues that we can use. The first one is the political one, which we have used extensively. Negotiations, deliberations, visits, and then warnings and so on. That this is the Timmermans avenue. We had to do it. But it has its limitations. We've all seen it. You can even say it has failed because I think it was seen as paternalist. It's Western Europeans telling the Easterners yet again that, what to do. So it caused the backlash. We must do it because a lot of Poles expect the EU to do it. But I think we've reached the end of the road. And then there is the legal road, which we're using now, which in a way is better because you have less of this paternalist element, but it's a very slow road. And now we also get pushback against the European Court of Justice. I think we should pursue this road, no matter what. We should also, in the end, impose fines, like the European Court of Justice has also done for the mine issue, close to the Czech Republic, when Poland didn't comply. I am not so much, some people are saying, well, just take Poland's rights away, political rights away, and cut the budget. I'm not really very much in favor of it. But maybe, yes, the extra goodies, like the COVID fund, that's perhaps a good idea to apply conditionality, because we must make clear that if you behave like this, you cannot have those extra funds. Concerning your question about Polexit, finally, I don't really believe we will get to Polexit. Poland, as we all know, cannot be forced out. If Poland wants to leave, it can do so, but I don't believe it wants it anyway, not even the government. The Poles are also among the most positive in the whole of the EU on European integration. Perhaps this enthusiasm will shrink a little bit, but not a lot, I think. Look at all the massive demonstrations in Poland last week. So I don't think so. So I think we will have to continue working with the means that we have and wait for the next government. So that means continue to apply legal pressure, trying not to be too paternalistic, but still put political pressure and take extra goodies away. But we will need a lot of patience. And we really have to remember that Poles, after all, have to solve this problem by themselves. Let me leave it there.
Thank you, Caroline. I have the same question to Shahin Vallée. What is your take on the standoff between Poland and the EU?
I share many of what Caroline has just said, but I'm probably a bit more relaxed about this situation. I'm more relaxed, and I think it's important to place this ruling in a general context. And there's been a very heated debate over the last few days as to whether this ruling by the Constitutional Tribunal was comparable in any way, shape, or form to previous rulings in Germany by the Constitutional Court that also, in some ways, challenged the European legal order. And while I take the argument of people that are more legal experts than I am about the fact that these two rulings are not comparable, I share the view that the rulings in Germany but also certain rulings in France about which I've written and that I can share with you, have creating the enabling environment for that constitutional ruling in Poland. And so I think we have opened, since really the European construction, what was called a dialogue of the judges, that in the last few years has become a dialogue that was far less civil and a lot more brutal, including in countries like Germany, in France. And to me, it's no surprise that others are using that dialogue of the judges to their interest. Of course, I make a clear difference between a genuine dialogue of the judges and the doctrine of reservations by National Constitutional Court that has existed for many years, and that in fact we tend to forget it, but has been at the heart of some of the best progresses in European law. If you remember the ruling of the German Constitutional Court in 1986, the so-called Solange ruling, it's a fundamental ruling because it's a ruling by which Germany said, wait a minute, we reserve the right to make Germany's basic law superior to European law when it comes to European fundamental rights, because there is no such thing as a European Charter for Fundamental Rights. And it's that ruling where basically the German Constitutional Court carved out an area where it said, in this area, the German constitution will supersede European law. It's that ruling that then enabled, 10 years later or more, the creation of the European Charter for Fundamental Rights. So I'm just pointing that example to show that these tensions have been part and parcel of the European construction effort. They've been more or less acrimonious. They've been more or less dangerous for the unity of the European legal order, but they've existed for a long time. I don't think it's true to say that we lived in a perfect world where the primacy of the European law was accepted by all, written down in the treaties. This was not the reality. We were living in a fragile construct where national constitutions had not agreed to be entirely subservient to the European treaties. And that's the case also of this ruling by the Conseil d'État in France last year, which basically didn't choose to rule a ruling by the European Court of Justice ultra vires, as did the German Constitutional Court, but decided that it would not implement the ruling. And it decided not to implement the ruling for a reason that is very similar to the Polish reason, because it said the Constitution, the French Constitution, forces the government to provide security to the French public. And that's a constitutional mandate that is stronger than any mandate in the European Treaty. So I'm not trying to equate the rulings, but I'm trying to say that we have collectively provided an enabling environment for these rulings. And so I think the last question is, how do we solve that situation? And here, so while I share the view of, I'm not worried about Polexit, and I think this discussion is somewhat misplaced. I think we should be very forceful and not be afraid of going down the path of economic, budgetary, legal, and political sanctions. I don't know if sanction is the right word, but suspending ultimately Poland's voting rights, if we think that's legitimate, is something that I wouldn't find entirely shocking, because I think if the EU believes that the European legal order is challenged, it has to fight with all its force to restore it. So, as you see, my intervention is mixed. On one hand, I'm trying to not give too much importance to this ruling, even though it is a very important one. I think placing it in a broader context of a long dialogue of judges, which sometimes was more or less acrimonious, is important. And at the same time, while trying to diminish its importance, I also think that the EU should not be afraid of standing firm and going for a strong response to it. And I think both, it sounds a bit contradictory, but I think both lines of thinking are compatible.
Thank you, Shahin. And now a turn for Milan. I will just say one thing. I would kindly suggest that we postpone discussing the prescription on how to deal with this crisis towards the later part of this discussion. Now it's time for the assessment and diagnosis. Milan, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the invitation. And let me also, at the very beginning, say two caveats. As I learned about being a speaker at this discussion this morning, I did not have a chance to discuss it with my colleagues who are more experts on this and who know German environment, political environment, and of course it's being discussed in Berlin. While the main attention is on the coalition talks between the Social Democrats, the Green Party, and the FDP, and also there is of course expectation that, as usual in Berlin, coalition talks take precedence and take priority whatever happens. And the new government will deal with it only once it is in place. And my second caveat is that although we are here, two people from German Council of Foreign Relations with Shahin, I will rather bring some Central European perspective from my area of expertise. I mean, Shahin is French, I'm Slovak, so telling you something about German discussion is really tricky, it's sensitive. Piotr will probably comment also against the whole context of German-Polish relations. There was acknowledgement in Berlin that relations are going to another low, that things might get worse, even before this decision of the Constitutional Court in Poland. And now it will be even more serious. So what I can say from some internal discussion is that the Polish government, there will be very careful observation how the Polish government will decide to use this ruling. Forms, decides to dismantle or not, or to stop the disciplinary chamber, while symbolically, showing strength to its own supporters and constituency through the ruling. But there is no doubt that it's the most far-reaching restriction of EU law of any member state, and that it undermines the EU cohesion. And as you know, for Germany, keeping EU cohesion after Brexit at EU27 is paramount. It also undermines the single market and the whole EU integrity. And this is far-reaching, this is slow motion and far-reaching crisis. The Commission is now, of course, in charge of a response. Further escalation is very likely, so there is concern, but it's also not clear what is the way forward. So I think I would leave the Berlin or the German context here for Piotr to pick up, and we might come back to it in the further discussion. And allow me maybe now to move on to Central European context, because eventually this situation will be discussed, and some even attempts at solution and de-escalation will have to come up from the European Council, which will meet at the end of the week. Out of 3 Visegrad partners, only one have publicly supported Poland in this ruling, and that is Hungary. for Czech and Slovak diplomacy, there is a big concern how far this can go and what would be the consequences also for East-West relations within the EU, which are already full of tensions. Now, for Hungary, this is interesting that Viktor Orban has been always very careful when it comes to legal confrontation with the EU. He was not shy to go into political confrontation, but he always consulted lawyers, and he was careful not to step too far. He would have, my personal opinion is that he would have not gone this far. He's a smaller country. He's a more careful player. He knows how the EU works. He's smarter about it, but he will now explore the space that Poland and this crisis that Poland did, because he's not risking much. It's not his crisis per se. So I think Poland, by doing this, has made situation worse also with Hungary, as it faces some other tensions on the rule of law and the withhold of a recovery fund and so on. And we might come back to the nuances, but if you remember, in December last year, it was Viktor Orban who traveled to Warsaw to make sure that the compromise that was negotiated by the German presidency will be accepted, and that the tricky relations between Prezes Kaczynski and Ziobro and others would not go out of control, and Poland will agree. His biggest worry in the days before the council in December was that Poland would not deliver. Now he is in a reverse situation. Poland decided to escalate, went to on crisis. Great. I mean, he will use it, and he will use it in a. I think he can be more. He can still be like more consequential and harder to predict element in all this. Now there is also Czech element. After the elections, of course, the populist Prime Minister Andrej Babiš is going to move to the opposition. It might take some time, but he lost narrowly. And there will be a new center-right government under Petr Fiala, the chairman of ODS, who knows Poland very well, whose party is in the same parliamentary group at the EU level with PiS, and who is a moderate, but who will also not shy away from, or who it will be tricky, but when he will be in the European Council once the Czech government is formed, there will be Czech EU presidency coming in the second half of 2022, and of course it's not in Czech interest to increase tensions with other EU capitals and with the institutions, but the political position of the new center-right Czech government on Europe will be less easy than thought, and on some ways Polish government might have a quiet ally in Prague. I will leave it at this. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Milan. And now I turn to Piotr. Last Sunday, I believe you joined the demonstrations protesting the verdict of the Constitutional Tribunal. Many people shouted that they fear Polexit. Is it also something that you fear? Is this the main risk that we are now facing, or are there some other more likely scenarios, or is it where our government leads us now?
Yeah, thank you very much, Szymon. And I will come to the Polexit question in a second. Let me start with just one remark unrelated to the issue of our discussion. Because I'm also one of the co-organizers of the event, and you may our audience may have seen a slightly different composition of the panel on in the invitation. So Duncan Robinson and Lucas Guttenberg had to cancel at the very short notice because of their illness. And I'm very grateful that Ananicz stepped in really this morning, which I truly appreciate. So just as a matter of explanation, why we are in this group and not in another constellation. But let me turn to the substance. I will come to the Polexit issue in a second, but let me start with the broader question: what is actually at stake? Because I think I agree with Caroline and with Shahin that there is a big controversy around the competencies between constitutional courts of the EU member states and the Court of Justice of the European Union. This is a Gordian knot which has never been basically cut and probably never be cut in the end. But I think I would frame this discussion slightly different. I think this is in an essence, this is not a legal or constitutional question we are discussing here, but it's very much a political question. And the political question is basically this for the European Union, for the EU member states, also for Poland. Can we have in the European Union the countries with a judiciary system which is fully controlled, which are fully controlled by the politician? I mean, can we imagine a EU member state where the Minister of Justice is at the same time Prosecutor General, who can go after each and every judge in the country by means of disciplinary proceedings, who nominates all judges and all prosecutors in the disciplinary system, who can sue judges for referring to the verdicts of the Court of Justice of the European Union, suspend them as a matter of punishment for referring to the verdicts of the ECJ, where judges can be punished for asking preliminary questions to the Court of Justice of the European Union, and we're basically, and you have a body which nominates all judges in Poland, or on all judges in a member state, which is composed by politicians of the ruling party and persons who, all of them, were selected by one party in the country. I think this is, and what I describe is exactly what we have in Poland. This is the reality. So we have such a system, and we need to, and this is, I think this is not a question that, I mean, it is of course a question, should the Court of Justice have the last word on that? Or should EU member state in general respect the rulings of the Court of Justice of the European Union? This is a fundamental issue, but a politically fundamental issue is, can we as EU member states, as the EU institutions, tolerate a situation where basically this kind of system exists not on paper, but in reality, where all those measures are applied in a EU member state? And then I think this is a really fundamental thing, and I would believe that what is the essence of the policy of the Polish government at the moment, and I'm coming to the Polexit question, is of course not to leave the European Union. I think Duncan Robertson, who's not with us today, but he wrote a great piece in The Economist yesterday, talking about dirty remain, which is a much more likely option and much more dangerous for the European Union. So because, you know, an exit of a EU member state is of course a huge problem, but an even more problematic situation is if we have one or many more EU member states who do not leave the European Union, but question the foundations of the bloc. And I think this is what's happening. So basically, the political message from the Polish government today is that we, of course, we want to stay in the European Union, but it needs to be a different union. It needs to be a European Union which allows the EU member states to introduce measures and introduce especially judiciary systems in which the principle of judicial independence is not a fundamental category. So basically, it shouldn't matter if a EU member state has a judiciary system where the principle of judicial independence is respected or not. And there shouldn't be, and this is the key part of it, there shouldn't be, or there mustn't be, any ultimate arbiter who decides whether this principle is respected or not. So basically, if you want to have a system in Poland where Piotr Buras nominates all judges in Poland and can dismiss them and without being even lawyer, that shouldn't, in the name of the Polish or national sovereignty, it should be allowed because this is a matter of national sovereignty. And this is and there's the Court of Justice, the EU member state, the Commission shouldn't meddle into our internal affairs because it is not allowed, allegedly not allowed by the treaties, and you cannot derive from the Article 19 of the European Treaty this competence for the Court of Justice of the European Union. So this is basically the, but as I said, this is not just a legal question. It's you need to answer this question politically. I mean, can you basically have this kind of system? And then briefly to the Polexit thing. I've already indicated that I'm not concerned about Polexit. I'm concerned about this the other scenario, which would in the end be detrimental not only to the European Union but of course also to Poland. And so what I'm really concerned about is a autocratization of the political systems of the EU member states with a tacit tolerance of the EU institutions and other member states. And that would, in my opinion, that will lead to a collapse of the European Union, because basically its rule of law, democratic foundations will erode, and we cannot survive as a European Union in such a situation. And to finish on that with the remark on the situation in Poland, because of course I know we have many viewers from other countries. I think there's Polexit is not a goal of the PIS, although what the party is doing is bringing us closer to a discussion whether it is worth staying within the European Union or not. And I think the whole conflict will, of course, fuel also anti-European feelings in some part of the Polish society. It will strengthen anti-EU forces. I wouldn't even exclude at some point, if there is a tough response from the European Union, that there is a breakup of the party of the Law and Justice, and that there is a formation of a much more radical anti-EU party around Zbigniew Ziobro and so the minister